We have been warning about it for years. Now the end is possibly near for the movie business, for theaters, for cinemas. And it's a real sin that Hollywood has sent us content that nobody wants to see. Today, we'll tell you why industry analysts are now declaring in the trades that the death spiral has arrived, and perhaps because of end-stage wokeness. Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Pro Channel, where each and every day we bring you 4 videos a day explaining entertainment, keeping you ahead of the culture curve. And by the way, folks, if you enjoy these deep dives into what's really going on and the stuff that you watch and see and hear and listen to, well, consider going on over to the Patreon. It's www.patreon.com/WDW Pro, where we'll let you know even more exclusive in-the-know stuff when it comes to entertainment. All right, folks, click the like button. Let's get underway. It's another video of excellence, and it's coming your way right now. Hollywood's theatrical business at risk of entering a negative feedback loop. Wall Street Analyst warns, and it's not just a small nobody, it's a somebody saying this. Hollywood is at risk of entering a negative feedback loop with fewer wide movie releases and a shrinking theater footprint, combining to squeeze box office revenue, a veteran media analyst says. In his annual assessment of the theatrical sector, billed as a memo to Hollywood, T.D. Cohen analyst Doug Kreutz notes that he has taken a bearish stance on the theatrical window for some time. Results from 2024, with total grosses slipping 4% from 2023 to $8.57 billion, the number of wide releases down 6% from pre-pandemic levels, and other factors have only reinforced his view. Quote, "We have said for several years now that the outlook for a sustained recovery looks questionable, and that we don't think the existing global theatrical footprint can be supported solely by a handful of blockbusters." Well, folks, this sounds very much like what we have been saying for so long, and we're happy to have somebody saying it with us. Perhaps they've been saying it even longer, but we don't know. This is great, though, to have finally the trades putting this out there and projecting it, and perhaps because they know their industry is at risk. Reading on, it says the number of screens in the U.S., this is so important. So important. Listen to this, folks. The number of screens in the United States has declined to 35,000 from 41,000 before the pandemic, with exhibition also facing big challenges in 2023 and 24 due to the strikes. We talked about this, but I want to call something out that perhaps is not called out in the article explicitly. It's not just the pandemic. It's not just the strikes. It's also the fact that Hollywood sacrificed their industry on the altar of wokeism.
Yep.
There were 2 things they were trying to placate. They wanted to make happy the coastal elites, and at the same time, they wanted to make happy the managers of the Middle Kingdom, the Beijing elite. And the problem is that those 2 sides, those 2 groups, the coastal elites in the United States, who are extremely woke, and those who are governing China, they don't agree on very much other than perhaps socialism/communism. But in terms of other values, they don't agree on much. And chasing those 2 groups was never going to work. And it completely disassociated Hollywood and the stuff they put out from middle America and almost everywhere that still holds on to any kind of traditional values. By the way, it's not just Deadline that's saying this. If we go over to landofgeek.com, it talks about how badly things are going for the box office in 2025. And it says, the brutal truth, Hollywood is flopping hard in 2025, barely even out of Q1. It says it's March and we're still in a cinematic drought. Guess what, folks? I don't see this drought ending until Lilo and Stitch. This is going to go on. This is basically a half year of a haggard box office. Panel, let's talk about it. What is it? We'll go to Brett first. Brett, what is it that has declined entertainment? And I don't think personally that the entertainment value went directly from the box office to streaming. Like, I don't think that people just said, we're going to stay home. I think this is an overall industry reduction. What do you say?
I do think it has a lot to do with everything that you just said. I think the death of the $50 million movie is a big thing. Like there aren't really any Tony Scotts anymore that are making movies that appeal to mass audiences that work beyond the superhero genre.
No
Like there's a
rom-coms.
no, that's and that I mean you can blame streaming directly for that, right? Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell put out a streaming movie last year called Anyone But You that they tried very, very hard to get them to dump on streaming. They offered them way more money to put it out on streaming, and they said, no, we want to take it to the box office. It will have more cultural relevance there. And the same thing happened with Blake Lively's movie, which ended up being very successful, which has backfired on her tremendously in the last 5 months. But those movies, they don't really have that anymore because everything goes to streaming. Like there are movies I'm looking forward to this year, like Working Man and The Amateur and what was the other one? The Accountant 2, all of which are middle budgets, not nearly as high as any of these superhero movies. But it's not like the audiences are clamoring for these in the way that they used to be. And I think it is a lie that people believe when they say that audiences want something new. I don't think that is necessarily as true as people make it out to be, because when they do have these successes, it ends up being bigger budget IP that they get people out for, and less of the movies that succeed seem to be the ones based off of original properties. At least I feel like there is an excuse made that people want something new, and I don't think it's as much as they make it out to be, at least not at theaters.
Brett, you're exactly right. According to Deadline, I'll read this paragraph, and I pulled it up as you were speaking because they're right in line. You're on it. The top 20 films at the domestic box office accounted for 64% of total domestic box office, compared to an average of 52% from 2015 to 2019. It's talking about post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic. In other words, a greater percentage of the total box office domestically is coming from the blockbusters. Yeah. Audiences also continued to stick to known quantities, as 8 of the top 10 films last year were sequels, spin-off, live-action reboots, or universe extensions. Now, you all tell me what you think about this panel. I think the issue of sequelitis, I think why that exists is not because audiences have become lazy and they don't want to experience new worlds and new characters. I think it's because the writers of today cannot construct a story and a world worth going to, because it comes through an ideological lens that people hope pre-existing universes won't give them. And when it does, they're very disappointed.
Yep. 110%. I think part of the problem is, like we talked a couple of days ago, movies used to have a certain natural flow. When you looked at the release calendar of movies, you knew summer was big tentpole, holiday season were your family movies. It's like you kind of knew when you wanted to go. But then Hollywood got addicted to the big blockbuster, and you don't get a break. And they stack these movies right on top of each other. So now your big box office, heavyweights don't even have room to breathe. July hits, and you've got big release. You've got 4 weeks of big releases. It's impossible. Whereas, we used to evaluate a movie by its legs. Oh, this guy's been #1 for 4 weeks now. If you don't make all of your money in the first weekend, you're not making money, and that's an absurdity. That is an absurdity. The other part of it is, these writers who exist today, they live in a very small, myopic bubble. They only know what they've seen on TV. They don't have the life experience, and they only want to talk about their ideology. Whereas, if you look at classic TV, even classic comics, older movies, a lot of these writers, they were in a war. They grew up someplace very tough. Mm-hmm. They experienced actual history and needed to explain it from varying points of views. What we have now is just a regurgitation of how they think it went. So it's not really, it's not like I don't think audiences have sequel fatigue or whatever. They have bad movie fatigue, and they want a variety back too, because also the theaters are so expensive now. You've also priced out my willingness to just go to the movies and say, you know what, I don't know what I want to do. I'll go see this movie I've never heard of. because also too, it's going to be streaming on Amazon in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So now there is no urgency. So they've got to get the streaming problem, the release calendar problem, and inject some originality back into it, so that people are more comfortable. Because now you go to the movies, it's an investment. If I go to the movies with my 3 kids, I'm dropping like $300, and the movie isn't even going to be that good.
How do you think they fix the schedule issue? Like that to me is the biggest one, because there's just too many that are being made, and they're up across a range of production companies. It's like July has what? It has Jurassic Park, it has Fantastic Four, that might be just before July, and then it has Superman, and those aren't all from the same studios. That's across 3 separate studios.
I think you need less screens, but more than need to be PLFs. I think that's how you handle it. Because, like, for example, Mufasa, when it came out, right, it absorbed all those PLFs away from Sonic. A lot of people would have loved to have seen Sonic in IMAX and so forth, but they couldn't because those PLFs simply weren't available. So I've been a big advocate for that.
Right there, Vash, real quick, let me just interject this for context. Folks, we think that more tickets were sold for Sonic than for Mufasa, yet Mufasa made more at the box office because it held every single PLF for like 2 months straight, which inflated its total ticket average to something like 18% more than the Sonic movies. Go ahead, Vash.
Yeah, and you're seeing a little bit of that, like AMC set to open, 65 ScreenX and 40X locations worldwide. That's an interesting little move right there. Also, too, I think to handle some of this, like Kevin and Paula was saying, and what you were saying, Brett, pricing variability. There has to be variable pricing attached to these things, because let's be honest, not all films are going to be priced the same in the minds of the consumer. And I think that's a reason why people aren't supporting films like they had before in the past, and they're just waiting for it to be on streaming, because that windowing practicing that they had established for years had been broken as well.
Absolutely. And Vash, go ahead, Lauren.
No, you go first. You started.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say, Vash, you were talking about, like you're looking at the upcoming schedule, like with 3 companies and the price points and all that. I can bring it full circle here with everything. Think back to, back to the 80s and such. There used to be a lot more film studios out there. It's the same problem that's plaguing all of America. Whereas now, if you have most of your organizations owned by like a good 6 or whatever companies, you don't get the variety. So if they all decide to die on the altar of woke, so to speak, they all make the same decision, it's going to impact all the movies. And then the theaters now are already banking on those same few studios just to get that 1 or 2 blockbusters that's going to make up for all those terrible movies that aren't going to make nothing at the box office, and these days aren't even going to stick around that long because they don't have any legs, because things go right to the streaming services. It's a greater issue where if all the films, like say Snow White, is going to be priced exactly the same as some indie film you've never probably even heard of unless you're going like a matinee or something like that, perhaps if they could maybe integrate like a system where the pricing's a bit different, because Kevin, if he's going to go see like a movie with his family, odds are most consumers are probably going to go with a safe bet, like a Marvel movie, something that had some weight to it in the past, as opposed to, well, we have this new black sheep here. It's not that they don't want to try. They don't want to spend like $100 for their family, high end, mind you, investment, and get something that's just going to be a artistic dud, so to speak.
That was how I felt. Like I was going to go see Black Bag, and I'm like, I'll wait till Tuesday when it's like $7 for a ticket.
Lauren, you had a thought? Share it, please.
Well, a question and a thought experiment. Do you guys get classic cinema in your areas? Do they play old movies? And how are those doing with the audience?
Yeah, so we have Tuesday night classics here in Harkins around my area, and those actually do pretty well because I think they have varied movies that they do get. Disney has been really unwilling to give a lot of their catalog to those Tuesday night classics for whatever reason. But for the studios that do participate in that program, like Paramount, for example, and Universal, they are well received. Like, for example, I remember Jaws made its way to IMAX like a year or so ago, and it was for a special price. That theater was packed, like really packed, and that's just free money.
Ever since the pandemic here, they started running classic cinema every month here, and that does surprisingly well. I've been actually really surprised to see how many people will show up for the classics, and that leads to the thought experiment. You were talking about what's changed. And I think that a lot of it is that movies aren't really fun anymore. When we made masculinity toxic, we lost things like action movies. We lost the ability to do comedies. And there's the budgetary problems that you already talked about with the blockbusters. Everybody's trying to hit the jackpot, where if you had some smaller budget movies, then you recoup your costs sooner. Things like thrillers that don't necessarily take a lot of money, or horror movies, and then everything else is pure profit. So here's the thought experiment. If there was a lost mummy movie from Brendan Fraser from around the period that those were coming out, that movie would do gangbusters, I guarantee you.
Well,
That's what's missing.
We actually see this in streaming, Lauren. I'm glad you brought it up. If we go to Statista, they have this information for us, and this has been verified in other studies. I believe a company called Hub looked into this. Consumers, and this was published in December of 2024, when asked about a favorite TV show consumers started watching in 2024, only 40% of respondents from the U.S. picked a new title. The majority of TV viewers interviewed tended to watch older series. 60% of the audience is tuning into older stuff, and I would suspect the same would be true at the box office if more opportunity was given. Now, that said, and we need to bring this back into the death spiral, because otherwise we're retreading water. And what I mean by that is we know that Hollywood has damaged itself by going into woke material. We know that the streaming dynamics have significantly hurt theaters. The death spiral issue is slightly different, and this is where the new territory is found. The decline of screens. Well, if we go from 41,000 to 35,000 screens in the United States since the pandemic, and then we assume, based on what this article is saying, and we assume that it's true, that there's actually an increase in the losses of theaters and less attendance, like this is escalating, right? It's not slowing down, it's accelerating.
Yep.
Then the question becomes the death spiral. At what point do you lose so many screens that you've actually lost the capacity? It's not just that you've lost revenue, but you've lost the capacity to match the revenue pre-pandemic. And then that's the death spiral, because you begin to reduce your ability to ever generate the necessary funds. So what do you all make of that theory? Do you look at this number and say, no, we're not even close to that? It would have to take half the screens before we worry about that.
This was going to be the second part of my point. Was I think the National Association of Theater Owners have to start flexing muscle. They have to push back the same way they push back on the same day release, because it's the studio greed that's hurting them the most. The pandemic exacerbated the issue, but for years we have been watching screens disappear. I know just again, I spent a big chunk of my early life working in movie theaters. I worked for a privately owned theater chain. It was had over 6 screens, and once the owner packed up and moved to Naples, all of but one of those theaters still exists. They've been converted to banks or something else. And so you're forcing people to have to go to the high-end theater, which again they don't want to do. Big screen TVs, 8K players, not having to worry about some idiot talking while you're trying to watch a movie is very enticing. So now that we've kind of pulled fun out of the experience, there is no urgency. So without fostering an environment, right? Because you got to think of it like this. Stop treating moviegoers like they're consumers and start treating them like they're customers. People will pay for experience. We're not giving the moviegoers the experience that they want or that they need. That starts in the theaters, but the theater owners can't keep up with this deluge of content from the studios, especially when 90% of it isn't very good. So Hollywood has a lot of self-managing and cleaning to do, but the theater owners have to be the ones that hold Hollywood accountable. And I think they're a little gun shy, because yes, a studio like Paramount will shut you down and not send you something, because a studio like Paramount can be a little spiteful, but they have to take that shot and say, hey, if we go out of business, you guys go out of business.
That's right. The downfall of Star Wars and Marvel is having a major impact, and somebody's going to have to pick up the slack. It's not a fun world for entertainment when people are watching at home The Office over and over, and yet it would not be appropriate, according to the wokies, to make anything like it anymore. And even the stars say, we couldn't do this again, and we wouldn't do this again. Well, you better, because otherwise, this business is going to other content creators. Helping Hollywood produce a product that you want to consume, that's what we do each and every day, folks. And this time, it's time to, well, say goodbye. We know, but don't cry. No, for we will have more videos on the way. We love to bring those videos and that information. And by the way, if you'd like even more, consider going to the Patreon page. It's www.patreon.com/WDW Pro. It's where we put out stuff exclusively there that we simply can't put out in other places for whatever reason, be it because it's too spicy or because, well, perhaps we're working to corroborate it. But you can find out things early and first over there. Folks, we surely have had a great time spending time with you. Consider clicking that like button, share, subscribe, click it, and stick it to those pesky algorithms. It is the notification bell, and drop a comment right on down below. Until the next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
Why listen to music made by people and companies who really don't like you? Check out Vacation Radio today and prepare for all new content made by the people behind the WDW Pro Channel. It's the place you need for all the music. That should be fun. Hundreds of songs, every genre you can imagine. Listen live on YouTube and enjoy a set list that's always sunny. It's Vacation Radio. What are you waiting for? Every WDW Pro video has a link to Vacation Radio in the video description. Try it out and subscribe today.